We are starting now the spring semester for the year 2017, and this is the first class of the season. And so far we have been going through the first chapter of the Anguttara Nikaya, that is the book of numerical discourses, and this is the chapter called the Ones. Just to recapitulate, the Anguttara Nikaya is divided into 11 chapters, and each chapter is governed by a particular number. So we have the first chapter, the book of ones, chapter of ones, then the chapter of twos, the chapter of threes, of fours, all the ways up to the chapter of 11s, which is a short chapter. And probably the reason why this collection was organized in this way is because when the Buddha would give discourses, he would often structure the discourses around a particular number of items. So he would say, there is one of these, there's two of these, there's three of these, four of these. And probably the reason why the Buddha structured his discourses around numbers is because the teachings in ancient India were not written down, but they had to be preserved through memory and through oral transmission. And so if you're trying to remember a certain number of a certain discourse, if you have the discourse structured around a number of items, then it becomes easier to remember. If the speaker just goes off, speaking whatever comes into his mind, just rambling on from topic to topic, then it's very difficult to preserve in memory. But when there are four of these, five of these, then when you come to that discourse, you know that there have to be four numbers, of four items or five items. Okay, so the first chapter is the book of ones, and even though because it's a book of ones, each sutta is very short. Usually it's just 2 or 3 sentences. There is, monks, one of these. What is that one? So and so. That is the one thing. And so we've gone through already the quite a number of the suttas in this collection. And actually the last class that was scheduled for December, in the middle of December, we were supposed to cover this chapter in that class, but that day I think we had a heavy snow, and so we had to cancel the class. And so now we're picking it up 4 months later. Okay, so I've divided these groups of suttas into sections, and sometimes the sections correspond to the title of the chapter. Sometimes a group, several chapters come into one section. So now we're in section 5, which I call the possible and the impossible, and this chapter is chapter 15, which in the text is called the impossible. Okay, so this is the way it reads. It is impossible and inconceivable, bhikkhus, the Buddha speaking to the monks, that a person accomplished in view could consider any conditioned phenomenon as permanent. There is no such possibility, but it is possible that a worldling might consider some conditioned phenomenon as permanent. There is such a possibility. And we may as well take the first 3 suttas, because these 3 actually form a set. Actually, the magnification can probably be increased. Or I could increase it from here. Whoops. A little bit bigger. Is that visible from the back? Visible from the back? If you can see it clearly, put your hand up. If you can't see it, put your hand up. Let's see if we can go to 200. Is that better? Okay, we can take the first three suttas because they form a set. Okay, so the second one reads, "It is impossible and inconceivable that a person accomplished in view could consider any conditioned phenomenon as pleasurable. There is no such possibility, but it is possible that a worldling might consider some conditioned phenomenon as pleasurable. There is such a possibility." The third sutta, "It is impossible and inconceivable that a person accomplished in view could consider anything, any dharma, as a self. There is no such possibility, but it is possible that a worldling might consider something, some dharma, as a self. There is such a possibility." So these three suttas form a set because they revolve around what is sometimes called the three lakkhana, the three characteristics of existence. So what are the three characteristics, the universal characteristics of existence? What is the first? Okay, impermanence, anicca. The second characteristic is dukkha, which is what sometimes translated suffering. And the third is anatta, non-self. Okay, but let us go through and take the important terms here one by one. So each of these suttas is setting up a contrast between two types of people. One is called the person accomplished in view, and the other is, the word is worldling. Okay, so the Pali word here for worldling is putujana. And the one accomplished in view is in Pali ditti sampanno. The word putujana comes from putu, which means many, and jana, which means person. So this is, the putujana is the ordinary person, the common person, but technically, that is the literal meaning, but technically it means a person who is not yet realized and attained any of the noble paths and fruits. In other words, a person who is not yet realized and seen the truth of the Dharma, the truth of the Buddha's teaching. So though Puthujjana literally means ordinary person or common person, we take somebody like Albert Einstein, certainly extraordinary person, not ordinary person, but still, because he hasn't realized path and fruit, we say he's a Puthujjana. We could take great emperors, extraordinary people, great movie actors and actresses, extraordinary talents, Shakespeare, brilliant playwright, brilliant novelists, brilliant musicians, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, extraordinary people, but still, because they haven't realized the truth of the Dharma, we say that they are Puthujjanas, worldlings, or ordinary people. And this is contrasted with Ditti Sampanno, which means a person who is Sampanno means acquired, accomplished, achieved. And the word Ditti means view. Often in Buddhism, the word Ditti is used in a negative sense, meaning distorted views, biased views, extremist views, wrong views. But here the word Ditti is being used to mean right view. And generally the word view suggests an opinion, a point of view. But in this context, view means not opinion, but it means the actual seeing, insight into the truth of the Dhamma. So a person who is Ditti Sampanno, accomplished in view, is one who has seen the truth of the Buddha's teaching. And that means one who has actually seen the Four Noble Truths, who has seen them clearly, definitively, and totally, who has seen all Four Noble Truths. In the process by which one arrives at Ditti Sampanno, the state of being accomplished in view, is the cultivation or the practice of the 3 stages of training in Buddhism. So the person to become Ditti Sampanno, one needs a foundation of sila, or moral conduct, ethical conduct. So the basis, the foundation, is moral conduct. Then on the basis of moral conduct, one cultivates through meditation a certain degree of samadhi or concentration. And then based on the concentrated mind, or using the concentrated mind as the means, then one examines the nature of the body and mind with insight. And one develops the insight wisdom, the wisdom through which one contemplates all the conditioned phenomena of body and mind as being anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanent, then dukkha I'm going to leave untranslated for now. And, okay, so anicca, dukkha, and non-self. And so one goes through the different stages of deeper and deeper, sharper and sharper, clearer and clearer insight into these 3 marks of existence. examining all the factors of body and mind, or the so-called 5 aggregates, in terms of these 3 characteristics. And then at a certain point, as the meditator is contemplating these 3 characteristics, a transition takes place whereby one enters onto the path, the noble path. The path, it said that the path arises. And so now one acquires these 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, and one goes on developing them. And as one develops them, at a certain point, a breakthrough takes place, whereby the mind turns away from all the conditioned phenomena that are impermanent, dukkha, and non-self, and realizes that which is not permanent, that which is not impermanent, which is not dukkha. In other words, it realizes nibbana, it experiences nibbana. And with that breakthrough to nibbana, one simultaneously comprehends all 4 of the Noble Truths. So one directly realizes the truth of cessation, the cessation of suffering, that is nibbana. And with that realization of the truth of cessation, one is able to see the truth, the deepest meaning of the truth of suffering. One is able to see how craving is the origin of suffering. And one now knows through direct experience that the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to the end of suffering. But when one reaches this breakthrough experience, it doesn't mean that one has come to the end of the path. Rather, one has reached the first of the 4 stages that will culminate in the final goal. So with that breakthrough, one becomes a stream enterer. That is, one has entered into the stream of the Dhamma. And so now one is assured, inwardly assured, that one will reach final liberation in a maximum of 7 more existences, 7 more lives. So when one becomes ditti sampanno, accomplished in view, it means one now has the right understanding, the inner vision, the inner view of the truth of the Dhamma. But one still has to use that view, use that insight, use that vision as the tool or means of cultivation. And as one develops that view in stages, the other defilements in sequence get cut off and eliminated until, with the final achievement, all of the defilements are eradicated. And then one becomes arahat, liberated one. Okay, so the one accomplished in view, we could say, is one who has reached the stage of definite achievement in the Buddha's teaching, of definite assurance that he or she will realize the goal of the teaching. But it's not yet the fulfillment of the goal. But this person now knows the truth of the teaching. They've seen the truth for themselves. And so they can't adopt any view that goes contrary to the truth of the teaching. Okay, now the text goes on, we'll go on examining the text. It says that the person accomplished in view, it's impossible that such a person could consider any conditioned phenomena as permanent, because this person, through their practice, has realized that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Now, it's sometimes said people who have an imperfect understanding of Buddhism will sometimes say Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent. That is not the case. What the Buddha says again and again is sabbe sankhara anicca. And okay, so what the Buddha is saying is that all sankharas are impermanent. And there's a distinction between saying all sankharas are impermanent and everything is impermanent, a difference. What are sankharas? The word sankhara, very important word in the Buddha's teaching. It's derived from the prefix sang, which means together. And the verb karoti, which means to make or to do. So sankharas are things which are put together, things which are constructed, so to speak, things which arise through the activity, through the causal influence or conditioning influence of various causes and conditions. So any sankhara arises in dependence on a number of conditions. So we might say this, what do you call this? This device, microphone device, is a sankhara. It's been put together, it's constructed, it consists of a variety of parts. If I take out the battery, so even the magnification of my voice is a sankhara, depends on the microphone. Okay, so everything that comes into being dependent on a multitude of causes and conditions is a sankhara. And those causes and conditions are also sankharas. So we have in Buddhism the so-called chain of causality is actually a chain of conditions, multiple conditions giving rise to a product, a sankhara, and that sankhara in turn functions as a condition for other things to arise. So I have here a cup of herbal tea. So this herbal tea depends first on the water. To be a cup, it depends on the cup. It depends on the infusion of the herbs. The herbs depend on the soil that grew the herbs, on the rainwater, clouds. And in fact, we could say that even the whole earth is in some way involved in the manifestation of this cup of herbal tea in front of me. So this is a sankhara dependent on many other sankharas. Does that sound familiar? We can see the cloud and the cup of tea, and the rain and the forests and the fields. Okay, so since any sankhara, any produced or conditioned phenomena depends on a variety of conditions And those conditions are always unstable, not everlasting. They arise and pass away. So when the condition vanishes, then the thing that depends on that condition also will vanish in time. Okay, so this is the general statement that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. But what is particularly to be seen as impermanent in the practice of insight are the conditioned phenomena that make up what we call our being, our existence. These are the conditioned phenomena of the 5 aggregates. So what are the 5 aggregates? After 4 months, my mind is a little rusty. Anybody remind me? In the exact order, not... Next. Right, okay, there's material form, the substance that makes up the material body. There is feelings, pleasant, painful, neutral feelings. There are perceptions, the mental function of identifying, noting things, the mental formations or volitional activities, and then consciousness. So these are the sankharas that are to be directly contemplated with insight. And so the person accomplished in view has gone through that process of contemplating all the 5 aggregates and seeing how they constantly arise and pass away. And so the person accomplished in view cannot grasp upon any conditioned phenomena and take it to be permanent. But the worldling who has not undergone that training in insight and who has not realized the impermanence of all conditioned phenomena can grasp upon some things and take them to be permanent. Even if this is not done, consciously through formulating a view that this is permanent, but we tend to grasp upon things in our ordinary day-to-day life, always building our hopes upon them, sort of assuming them to be permanent. Like we have our beloved relatives, parents, wife, husband, children. In a way, we always assume, even though intellectually we know they're going to die, but we always, at some unconscious level, suppose that whenever I come home, my husband will be there, my wife will be there. When I call up, ring a certain telephone number, my mother will answer the phone, my father will answer the phone. If you're a parent with young children, you always expect at 3:30, 4 o'clock, the children will come in through the door when school lets out. But we can't count on anything being permanent. Suddenly, disaster can strike. And then if we have the understanding of impermanence, of course one feels grief, but one will be able to adjust to that because one recognizes this is the universal law of life. But if one is sort of grasping at that deep level to that view of permanence, when one loses parents, brothers, sisters, husband, wife, children, then the grief just strikes right to the marrow of the bones, and it just lasts for months and years, and sometimes it can drive people mad. Okay, so this is all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Okay, the next one is the counterpart, we could say, or this revolves around that universal characteristic of dukkha, that all conditioned phenomena are dukkha. And I left that untranslated Because sometimes, and I think I've done this myself, and I do it, for want of a better alternative, we translate dukkha as suffering. So we say, all conditioned phenomena, sabbe sankhara dukkati, all conditioned phenomena are suffering. And then we can draw the conclusion from that, since everything in my life is conditioned phenomena, it means that the Buddha is saying that all life is suffering. But then we think, when I go out to a nice restaurant and have delicious food, that's not suffering. And if I go hear some beautiful music, not suffering. And even when I have conversations with friends and meetings with friends, it can be very pleasurable. And even when we do study the Dharma and delight in the Dharma, that's pleasurable. So dukkha does not, let us say, suffering is only one meaning of the word dukkha. And so sometimes the texts speak about three kinds of dukkha, three aspects of dukkha. One is called dukkha, and this is the dukkha which consists in pain and suffering. So this is dukkha in the exact literal sense. So when I feel upset, that is dukkha. When I'm undergoing severe headache, that is dukkha. If I'm disappointed, my hopes were not realized, that is dukkha. People turn against me and I become angry and upset, that is dukkha. So that is dukkha in the literal sense. The second aspect is called viparinama dukkha, which means the dukkha due to change, and particularly due to what you may call change as deterioration. The dukkha due to deterioration, decline, or loss. And this applies, but it's said, to pleasant feeling or to happiness. So we experience pleasure or happiness through contact with something that is the condition for pleasure. But then when that condition is broken, then there arises experienced suffering. And so if we look at that pleasure or happiness at from a deeper perspective, we could say that it is already a ground or basis for suffering. That is, when there's clinging to that pleasure, then when that pleasure changes, it's going to give rise either to suffering or some dissatisfaction. So I've gone to that restaurant, I've had that delicious meal, I'm eating it, I'm experiencing sukha, real pleasure, delight, particularly when I was doing that I did a 16-day water-only fast in January, early February. And then the mind was always thinking of especially the Indian curries and spicy Mexican food. And then on the 17th day, they come to my room with a big glass of, it's a combination of watermelon and celery juice. This is the breaking of the fast. And if you can imagine what the nectar of the gods tastes like, That is what that big glass of celery and watermelon juice tasted like. And so they tell you to drink it slowly because you haven't had any nutrients over 16 days. So one is drinking it very slowly, but watching as the glass gets, the level of the liquid gets lower, lower, and lower. The bliss of the delightful taste starts to get tarnished by concern that the liquid is getting lower and lower and lower, until that comes just sort of the bubbles that one is sort of swishing up through the straw. They give you the straw, getting sort of the last traces of that, the last remnants of those bubbles. And then it's all over, and then big disappointment comes. And then one is looking at the clock. What time will the next glass of watermelon juice come? Okay, so this is viparinama dukkha, when what is pleasant comes to an end, then there arises pain, or it could be, that doesn't have to be severe pain, but some kind of dissatisfaction, disappointment. Okay, then the third aspect of dukkha is sankhara dukkha. This is called, it's very difficult to translate this, but we can call it maybe the intrinsic or the inherent unsatisfactoriness or inadequacy or defectiveness of all conditioned phenomena. And this kind of dukkha we can explain as the dukkha that arises from the fact that all of these conditioned phenomena are due to causes and conditions, and therefore will eventually pass away. It's a little bit different from viparinama dukkha, the dukkha due to change or deterioration. Since this is the kind of unsatisfactoriness that comes just from seeing that all of these phenomena of body and mind, or the five aggregates, are conditioned phenomena, that their very nature is to be arising and passing away, arising and passing away. There was a statement, I actually found this in the commentary to Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, explaining this kind of dukkha. It said that this is the kind of dukkha that is usually understood only by the Aryans, the noble ones. And it compares this to, let me see if I could remember that simile exactly. Yeah, it's like, okay, now I think I got it. Okay. For the ordinary person, this kind of dukkha is like dust that blows against the skin. You know, one is hardly aware of dust blowing against the skin. But for the Aryan, the noble person, this kind of dukkha, it's like a speck of dust that gets in the eye. You know, if dust gets in the eye, it's felt as annoying or painful. So the noble one is able to perceive this kind of dukkha, whereas for ordinary people, we're not aware of this, or at least generally not aware unless we develop very sharp insight. But it's when one is practicing the clear and deep insight and seeing how everything in the body is just the constellation, conglomeration of material phenomena from moment to moment, just arising and breaking up, arising and breaking up. And the mind is just a stream of mental phenomena that are always arising and breaking up. Then this type of dukkha starts to become apparent. Okay, then we come to the third, or the sutta that revolves around the third characteristic. This is, here it is said that it's impossible that a person accomplished in view could consider anything, any dharma, any phenomena as a self. There is no such possibility. But it is possible that a worldling might consider something, some dhamma, as a self. And in this sutta, the word used is not sankhara, but dhamma. And in the general statement that we find in the suttas, it said, sabbe Dhamma anatta, that all dharmas, all things, everything unconditionally and absolutely is not a self. Why the word sankhara is used in relation to impermanence and dukkha, but the word Dhamma is used in relation to anatta, non-self? This is an interesting question. And I've heard different views, different explanations. I don't know what the correct explanation is. Maybe does anybody have any ideas about it? Okay, one explanation that I've heard, I think Venerable Narada uses this in his notes to the Dhammapada translation, that Dhamma is said to include Nibbana, so that the worldling might take even Nibbana to be a self, but the noble one won't take Nibbana to be a self. That's one explanation. I don't know whether it's correct or not. But in the suttas, when sabbe dhamma anatta is used, it's always related to the five aggregates. So maybe we don't have to settle on a definite explanation for the difference. But the important point is that according to the Buddha's teaching, everything that constitutes our personal identity, all of the factors of mind and body, the five aggregates, are not and cannot be taken as a true, substantial basis of personal identity. This doesn't mean, the way I understand it, that the Buddha teaches that there is no self. I don't think there's any such statement in the Nikayas or suttas themselves. Because speaking in conventional terms, we say that there is the person, there is the individual. We could even say that I have a self in the sense of the empirical person, the person that I distinguish myself, I distinguish myself from you, from others, and so on. So in a conventional or empirical sense, we could say that there is this self, and the Buddha says, by yourself evil is done, by yourself good is done, you yourself must make an effort. So the Buddha even uses the word atta, self, in this conventional sense. But what the teaching of anatta means is that there is no metaphysical self, that there is no kind of inner subject, substantial subject, who is the subject of feeling, the subject of perception, the subject of action, the subject of consciousness, a lasting or enduring center of personal identity. Because when we examine what we call myself, then what we find are the five aggregates, which are functioning together, always arising and passing away. But it's because these five aggregates function in unison, and because they arise and pass away in such rapid succession, that they create the illusion or the appearance of an enduring I. So this probably is what we could say is the meaning of self that's rejected by the Buddha, an enduring I, or an inner, stable subject of experience. And this was the great quest of Indian thought in the time of the Buddha, and actually in the century or two leading up to the arising of the Buddha, was the quest to discover what is the true inner self of the person, of the human being. So this was the quest that came to manifestation in the texts that come at the end of the Vedas, called the Upanishads. So the ancient rishis or sages would reflect upon and examine their person, and through this very rigorous inquiry, they would come to the conclusion the body perishes at death, so it's not the self. Then we have the breath, which is impermanent. The vitality of the body is impermanent, so it's not the self. And the mental activity is not the self. But at the very center of all these sheaths or layers of the individual, there is the pure awareness. And that, they say, is using the Sanskrit word, Atma. And Atma is the same as the Pali word, Atta. So the Brahminic thinkers, whose thought is expressed in the Upanishads, regarded the Atman, the self, as being the true, stable, permanent, unchanging reality. And all of the phenomena of the world is either just illusory appearance or the manifestation of the Atma, of the self. But the Buddha, it seems, pursued his line of inquiry, going further and deeper than the sages of the Upanishads, and he examined what is it here that one can take to be the self. And probably he investigated through the chain of dependent origination till he came to consciousness, which is what the Upanishads take to be the self. And the Buddha found that consciousness also arises based upon causes and conditions. And so consciousness too is arising and passing. And therefore consciousness is non-self. And for the Buddha, it is the penetration of this mark, this characteristic of non-self, that is the gateway to liberation. And it's the view of self, even the very subtle, sublime, refined view of self that was held by the sages of the Upanishads, That is the subtlest barrier to liberation. And so a person who who is accomplished in view has developed the insight into the selfless nature of phenomena, developed that insight to the very deepest level, and it's by penetrating the subtlest clinging to the view of a self that this person eliminates the view of self and arrives at the true correct view, which is the view of non-self, and thereby becomes one accomplished in view. Okay, maybe I'll pause here and then ask whether there's any questions on anything that was presented so far. Yeah, please don't feel shy or hesitant to ask. Yeah, and we have this microphone, the wireless microphone.
I'm not very good at using a microphone, I think, either. But is it possible that, in a sense, it sounds like you answered the question yourself about why the Buddha used the word Dhamma, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta,
Yeah.
because it seems to me that Dhamma is associated more with an enduring, a sense of that subtle barrier, that sort of enduring sense of self, or this idea that perhaps it's, in an obvious way, the sankhara is obviously conditioned, or conditional. However, a Dhamma might be taken as being perceived as permanent, and therefore say, well, there is a Dhamma, there is a permanent self. So the Buddha seems to go directly toward that, and addressing that directly and saying, no Dhamma is a Sabbe Dhamma Anatta.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good suggestion. Yeah, it could be even that okay, we have like the 5 aggregates, so those are sankharas, those are obviously not self, but it could be a very, very subtle, refined idea of a self. So that projecting the idea of self onto something which is like a very refined notion, so one might conclude, okay, the 5 aggregates are not self, but there's this very subtle spiritual reality, which is the true self.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be a good suggestion. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Ravi.
Thanks. Bhante, regarding the Tilakkana, Anicca, Dukkha, Anatma, you mentioned about Anicca.
Yeah.
I believe it says all conditioned things are impermanent, right?
Yeah.
Conditioned, yeah. But in the broader sense, isn't the entire cosmos impermanent? And which means, in other words, the earth, the planets, everything. Nothing is permanent, and they are all, it's probably what they call the muon or the God particle, maybe the only thing that will continue as such.
What is that?
Everything is an aggregation of different things, different forces. And from that perspective, I suppose all conditioned things are impermanent. Could apply could apply to everything in the universe.
Of course, it applies to the universe itself, but the universe itself will always exist in some form.
But it continues to change.
But it goes through, according to the Buddhist text, it goes through, or any world system within the universe will go through a cyclical pattern of development. Then it reaches the maximum point of development in a stage of dissolution or disintegration, till it reaches the maximum point of disintegration. Then it will go through again the stage of development, then dissolution.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, so let us, if any other questions that come up. Okay, so let us go on to the next suttas in this chapter. Okay, now this is, again, these suttas are building a contrast between the person accomplished in view and the worldling. And I see, a proofing error, there's too much space here. But that's not my main concern. Or uneven space here. Since there's an elision, I will read what it would say in full. Okay, it is impossible and inconceivable, monks, that a person accomplished in view could deprive his mother of life. Then the next sentence should read, but it is possible that a worldling could deprive his mother of life. Then it would continue, it is impossible that a person accomplished in view could deprive his father of life, but it's possible that a worldling could deprive his father of life. It is impossible that a person accomplished in view could deprive an arahat of life, but a worldling could do that. It is impossible that a person accomplished in view could, out of hatred, shed the blood of the Buddha, the Tathagata, the Buddha, but a worldling could do that. And it is impossible that a person accomplished in view could create a schism, a division in the Sangha, but it is possible that a worldling could do something like, could do that, could create a schism in the Sangha. Okay, these 5 actions have a special name in Buddhism. They're called the 5 anantarika kammas. That is, the actions, the deeds that bring immediate retribution. In that one, these are considered in the Buddha's teaching the 5 most terrible types of karma that one could commit. And these, if one creates these karmas, if one does these deeds, the outcome, the result, is that that karma will bring in the next life, inevitably, a rebirth in hell. And so, the text is saying that a person, when one reaches the stage of stream entera, when one acquires the right view, it becomes impossible for that person to take their mother's life, to take their father's life, to kill an arahant, a fully liberated person. It becomes impossible for that person, with a mind of hatred, to shed the blood of the Tathagata, of the Buddha. And this particular principle, I think, was framed because of Devadatta, who was the Buddha's malicious and envious cousin, who he wanted to become, when the Buddha was growing old, Devadatta was ambitious and wanted to get control of the Sangha, of the order. And so he tried to persuade the Buddha to retire and hand over control of the Sangha to himself. When the Buddha refused to do that and spoke harshly to Devadatta, or sternly to Devadatta, the Buddha doesn't speak harshly but sternly, then Devadatta started to nurture hatred towards the Buddha, and he tried to kill the Buddha, to assassinate him. He went up to a high mountain when the Buddha was doing walking meditation outside a cave, and he pushed a boulder so that the boulder fell down the mountain. And Devadatta intended to bolt the boulder to strike the Buddha and kill him. But the boulder hit another rock, and its course was diverted. It was diverted but a splint of rock broke off from the boulder and struck the Buddha's foot and caused the Buddha to bleed. So that is why it's said with a mind of hatred, but the Buddha had a physician, personal physician, whose name was Jivaka. And Jivaka was a stream enterer. And one time, when the Buddha had a particular illness, Jivaka was called to treat the Buddha, and to treat the Buddha, he had to cut part of the Buddha's body in order to drain out some of the bad, I think it was like a boil of some sort that was festering. And so to cure, to heal the Buddha, he had to cut that boil and remove the pus and the bad blood. But he was doing this with a mind of reverence and with loving kindness towards the Buddha, so he certainly didn't generate that bad karma. And then the fifth extremely unwholesome deed is when the Sangha, this is the order of monks and nuns, when they are living in harmony with evil intention to try to create a schism, a division, so that the order becomes divided into two sections, two divisions, which have a hostile relationship to one another. Because according to the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma continues to flourish when the Sangha is living in harmony. And if one creates division, then it means that the Dharma, the lifeblood of the Dharma, will decay. Okay, so it's said that when one reaches the stage of stream enterer, these 5 deeds becomes impossible for one to commit. And the interesting question comes up, I don't know whether I should bring this question up. Can a noble person by accident kill their mother or father? Not intending to kill anybody, but doing something, and then the result is that the parent dies. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, then the 6th thing that's said here that a person accomplished in view cannot do is said to acknowledge another teacher, to acknowledge someone other than the Buddha as the word used here. It's a word that has a stronger meaning or a more precise meaning in Pali and in the Indian worldview or domain of discourse than the English word teacher. So the word sutta means the teacher in the sense of a founder of a spiritual teaching. It doesn't mean that, for example, that if you're a Buddhist, you have to say, I accept teachings only from the Buddha himself. I can't recognize this elder monk, this elder nun as my teacher. I won't take teachings from Ajahn Chah or from Thich Nhat Hanh or the Dalai Lama or from Bhikkhu Bodhi or anybody else, because the Buddha is my teacher. I acknowledge only the Buddha. But we don't claim to be sattas. The satta is one who establishes the founder of a teaching. And so one who becomes ditti sampanno, who gains the view, the view of the Dharma, the view of the Four Noble Truths, won't look to another spiritual founder, the founder of another spiritual teaching, as being the supreme teacher. It doesn't mean that one will disrespect other religious teachers. For example, as a Buddhist, I can have respect and reverence for teachings of Jesus that I find in the New Testament, or teachings of the sages of the Upanishads. But I won't see them as being the sutta, as being the supreme teacher, the one that I look to as my sarana, as my refuge. And so a person who has gained the experiential realization of the Dhamma looks only to the Buddha as being the satta, the supreme spiritual teacher. But a worldling could acknowledge someone other than the Buddha as a teacher. Even a worldling who previously recognized the Buddha as a teacher, even somebody who had previously been a monk, can then turn away from the Buddha and look to some other teacher. For example, during the Buddha's time, there was a monk, his name was Sunakata. His story is told, it's in the Digha Nikaya. I think it's the first sutta in the third part of the Digha Nikaya. Payatika Sutta, I think it's called. Okay, Sunakata, he was a monk who placed a lot of his esteem depended upon the practice of extreme austerities, extreme ascetic practices. So one time he was appointed actually the Buddha's attendant, and he was walking with the Buddha, probably going to the village on alms round or coming back, and then they passed an ascetic who is following one of these extreme practices, like the dog practice, which is behaving like a dog, going around on all fours and barking like a dog, going naked, barking like a dog. And then Sunakata pointed him out and said, "That is an arahat." That's a holy one. And the Buddha said to him, "Sunakata, you would not know an arhat if you saw him." And this went on several times in different ways until eventually, and then Sunakata kept on demanding that the Buddha perform some kind of miraculous feat for him, some exercise of superpower so he could strengthen his faith and devotion towards the Buddha. But the Buddha knew that real faith doesn't depend on miracles, but on acceptance of truth. And so the Buddha refused to perform a miracle for him, and eventually Sunakata left the Buddha and then started to follow other teachers. And then in the assembly in Vesali, at the communal gatherings, he started to denounce the Buddha as being one who doesn't possess any superpowers. Okay, maybe I'll ask now if there's any questions based on this section. Whoa. Usually we have a lot of questions. I don't know what's happened. Maybe everything is so clear and obvious. Okay, maybe we do one more sutta. There's a short sutta coming up. Okay, and this is continuing now with the theme of this section, which is the possible and the impossible. So it said that it's impossible and inconceivable that two arahats who were perfectly enlightened Buddhas could arise contemporaneously at the same time in one world system. There's no such possibility, but it's possible that one arahat who is a perfectly enlightened Buddha might arise in one world system. There is such a possibility. Okay, now in Buddhism we speak about 3 types of liberated beings. All 3 of these liberated beings are arahats in the sense that they have reached and fulfilled the defining characteristic of an arahat. And that defining characteristic of an arahat is the eradication of all defilements of the mind. And by eradicating all the defilements, the kilesas, gaining liberation from the cycle of birth and death, liberation from the round of rebirths. So what marks the arahat is the eradication of kilesas or defilements, and vimutti, that is release or liberation. But the 3 types of arahats differ in certain other respects. Okay, first there is the Sammasambuddha. A Sammasambuddha is one who discovers the Dharma, the ultimate truth, on his own without dependence upon anybody else, without dependence on a teacher who transmits the truth to him. And having discovered the Dhamma on his own, he establishes the Dharma in the world at a time when it has been lost, at a time when it has vanished. So Buddhism, it sees history to be a kind of cyclical process during which at times there is a Buddha existing in the world, teaching the Dharma, opening the gates to liberation to countless others. Then the Buddha passes away, and over time the Dhamma gradually declines, deteriorates, until it disappears. Then when it has vanished, then the path to liberation is not proclaimed in the world. Then after a certain amount of time, a person will arise who discovers the truth by himself, fully understands that truth, and then proclaims the truth again in the world and establishes the Dharma in the world. And to take on this role, okay, the being who does that, who discovers the truth and proclaims it at a time when it has vanished, that is a Sammasambuddha. And to fulfill this role, the Sammasambuddha, the fully enlightened one, has to develop or acquire a very wide range of higher knowledges. He has to develop or acquire the ability to be able to know the minds of many types of people, and to be able to teach in the exact way that corresponds to the needs, to the interests, to the capacities of the people that he's teaching. He has to acquire a very thorough knowledge of the workings of karma, of the whole cosmos, the nature of the universe, the different realms of existence, and how the law of karma operates in these different realms of existence. And so the Sammasambuddha has vast powers of knowledge and vast superpowers or miraculous powers, wondrous powers that other beings don't have. And these enable the Buddha to establish and promote the Dharma in the world and to initiate a new unfolding of the Dharma in the world. Okay, so this is the first type of liberated being. Okay, the second type is called a Pacceka Buddha, or in Sanskrit, it's Pratyeka Buddha. The word Pratyeka means individual or personal. So a Pacceka Buddha is a person who, without depending on a teacher, without depending on guidance from others, discovers the Dharma on his own during a period when it is not being proclaimed by a Buddha. But the Pacceka Buddha does not acquire the extensive knowledges and spiritual powers of a Sammasambuddha. And so the Pacceka Buddha does not try to proclaim the liberating Dhamma in the world. The Pacceka Buddha gains enlightenment, gains liberation, and it's said in the commentaries that they will teach others. Sometimes Pacceka Buddha is translated silent Buddha, but that's not completely correct. The Pacceka Buddhas will teach, they'll teach basics of morality, they'll give some instructions in meditation, but they don't try to transmit the truth of the Dhamma, the ultimate truth, to others. And they don't establish a system to preserve and promulgate the truth they've realized. Okay, so that's the Pacceka Buddha, enlightened and liberated, but not an enlightener and liberator of others. Okay, then the third type of Arhat is the Savaka Arhat. This is the disciple the person who becomes a disciple of the Buddha, receives the instructions from the Buddha, maybe not necessarily directly from the Buddha himself, but within the lineage established by the Buddha, then practices in accordance with those instructions, and then gains liberation, enlightenment and liberation, by practicing, guided by the Dhamma and the training laid down and propagated originally by the Buddha and by those in succession from the Buddha. So, for example, Sariputta had many disciples who became arhats through the guidance of Sariputta, but Sariputta got his guidance from the Buddha. And maybe down to the present time, maybe in some of the countries of forests of Southeast Asia, there are monks who might be arhats, who've maybe just studied the Dhamma and then went and practiced, even without getting guidance from a meditation master. They become arhats, but they're depending on the instructions, the methods of practice coming down from the Buddha. Okay, so in the world, at any time, there can be many Pacceka Buddhas. There will be many disciple arhats. But at one time in the world, there'll be only one Sammasambuddha. So there can't be, and it's said that as long as the Dharma of one Sammasambuddha exists in the world, another Sammasambuddha will not arise. So as long as Gautama or Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching lasts, even up to the present, there won't be another Buddha arising in the world. So sometimes I see on the internet, people are proclaiming, a new Buddha has arisen here in Los Angeles. Or we have our meditation center with our teacher, and our teacher is the Supreme Buddha. But we can know that as long as Gautama Buddha's teaching exists in the world, those people are either they're deluded themselves or their disciples are deluded. Okay, we can stop now the presentation and we can come back. Let's say we go for lunch and then come back 12:15. 12:15 is convenient. And then we could have a little question and answer session. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Did you hand out, was that the sheet with the verses? Okay, so we'll do the sharing of the merits. So now, after speaking on the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma, now we share the merits with the Devas, the Dhamma protecting Devas, the Bhutas or the fair spirits, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, and with all beings. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditpa chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditpa chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditpa chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibhuting. Okay, before we end, maybe a couple of announcements. One announcement is that next week we won't have a class because I have to do some teaching in New York City. And so the next class will be on the following Saturday. That will be April 15th. And so we will continue with the book of the ones, the next suttas. Okay, the next announcement. You know, the most important global crisis that the world is facing right now is climate change. On April 29th, there's going to be a mass mobilization in Washington, D.C. for people from all over the country to show that we consider climate change to be a vital issue. And the new administration has been trying to cover up the whole climate crisis, cutting funding for the Environmental Protection Agency, trying to even dismiss to denigrate scientists who are involved investigating climate issues. So there's going to be a mass mobilization for people to show that we consider preserving human society, preserving a viable planet is a vital concern to us. Our organization, Buddhist Global Relief, together with some other Buddhist organizations in New York, reserved 3 buses to bring people to the climate, this mobilization in Washington on April 29th. I would urge you to register for those buses, but announcements have gone out, and as of yesterday, I heard there were only 2 seats left on the 3rd bus. And what is astonishing, different faith organizations have been arranging buses to go to Washington. What I heard on the conference call last night, the Christians, the Jews, Jewish organizations, at most have 2 buses. The religion, the faith, with the greatest number of buses going to Washington, with 3 buses, is the is Buddhism. And that's largely through, I have to give special credit to the organizational skill and devotion and initiative of one woman, Regina Valdez, who has really done what in Sri Lanka we call a yeoman service in organizing these buses. And we've even been discussing last night setting up a 4th bus that will be exclusively, they call it a Chinese-speaking bus. Which doesn't mean that the bus speaks Chinese. But we're trying to get Venerable Reifa from Brooklyn and some of the temples in Chinatown to mobilize the Chinese-speaking people to come on that 4th bus. They will decide on Monday whether that will be possible. But even though if you haven't registered on any of these buses, I'm sorry, but you won't be able to ride down on the Buddhist bus, but there are many other buses being organized by the People's Climate Mobilization. So if you want to go, and I urge you, if you're free that day, to go down, go to the website of People's Climate Mobilization and try to register on a bus leaving from New York to Washington, D.C. They'll be leaving early because we have to leave at 6 a.m. to get there in time for the march starts at noon, around noon, and then coming back the same evening. Okay, so we'll take the break now for lunch and then come back at 12:15. Oh, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm rusty, as they say. Been drinking too many glasses of watermelon and celery juice. Okay, so we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha.